Hey, what's up, family? Happy Friday. It's your boy Tony, and this is the 131st take of the year. And I want to talk about my faith, a little bit about my faith, especially as it pertains to some recent news that came out. You know, I like to cover the current events. And just recently, if you don't know this guy, this is Pastor Andy Stanley. He's the son of Pastor Charles Stanley, and I just have this video playing in double speed just to kind of show what he's been talking about. But he has come under fire from other Christians because of a few simple statements that he made. He said Christians need to unhitch the Old Testament from their faith. And it's drawn a lot of social media backfire, backlash, whatever you want to call it. I'll just read a couple of the tweets that came out. So one person just said Andy Stanley got this one very wrong. Someone else tweeted, I feel like what Andy was trying to say, but unhitching Jesus from their original context is the opposite of helpful. So just to give you a bit more in-depth synopsis, whatever, of what he was trying to say. This comes from part of his three-part sermon, which he preached here on April 30th to his congregation at North Point Community Church in Alpharetta, Georgia. The sermon is, again, the third and final lesson of a series that was called Aftermath, Not Difficult. So you can obviously go right online on YouTube and catch it for yourself. So this article that I'm reading from CBN News says that Stanley used Acts 15 in a previous sermon describing how the early church decided that Gentile converts did not need to observe Jewish law to become Christians. And so if you're not really that into Christianity or religion in general, Christianity basically is people that follow Christ. So they're separate from Jews who have their own set of laws and things like that, separate from Muslims who practice Islam. It's its own separate group. I took a religious studies class in like my freshman year, maybe even my junior year, I can't remember, of college, and we went through like all the different types of religions in the world. Those are like the main three for most of the mid to western world, and then you have Hinduism and Buddhism, and I can't remember the other one out there, but maybe it's just five. But anyway, so basically he went on to say first century church leaders unhitched the church from their worldview, the value system, and regulations of Jewish scriptures. Stanley continues to say Peter, James, Paul, those folks elected to unhitch the Christian faith from their own Jewish scriptures, and then he says, my friends, we must do the same as well. And I kind of get what he's coming from. If anyone has read the Old Testament from beginning to end, first, if you know the Bible, there are 66 books in the Bible, the majority of which are Old Testament books, and it can be very confusing when you look at, and a lot of people that are atheists will say and use the Old Testament to debunk a lot of the Christian values, namely the killings that happen, the abortions that happen, just the complete outright sin that happens in the Old Testament, and they'll use that. So basically he says, you know what, for a lot of Gentiles in the first century, they didn't understand the Old Testament, but they saw this man named Jesus going around and doing all of these great things for people, saving them, healing them, and then basically dying on the cross. And if you believe that, then that's all you need to believe. And that's what I think Stanley's trying to say. So in his sermon, Stanley expressed his concern that many Christians are turning away from the faith because of certain passages in the Old Testament. He argues the early church moved past the Old Testament for the sake of newly converted Gentile believers, and that the resurrection of Jesus was their focus. He said Jesus' new covenant, his covenant with the nations, his covenant with you, his covenant with us, can stand on its own two nail-scarred resurrection feet. It does not need propping up by Jewish scriptures. The Bible did not create Christianity. The resurrection of Jesus created and launched Christianity. He's saying, your whole house of Old Testament cards can come tumbling down. The question is, did Jesus rise from the dead? And eyewitnesses said he did. So, great sermon, Pastor Stanley. But then I found a great way to compare this, and they actually brought up Avengers Infinity War. So I went to christiantoday.com where they wrote this, and listen to this, because this is great. For a contemporary example, consider the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which dramatically culminated, but of course didn't conclude if you've seen it, with the epic superhero crossover event Avengers Infinity War, which again came out last month. It's a film where the prelude is essential. If you ask me, most people that went to see Infinity War and haven't seen any of the movies that came before that were completely confused. They probably came out thinking Thanos was a good guy and that the Avengers were the bad guys trying to stop him. So imagine just, reading the New Testament and having that sort of feeling. I don't think it's the exact same. Like, I think most people, because they know who Jesus is and they hear that Jesus is the good guy, they would know that. And obviously Satan is in no way painted in a good picture in any way. Satan's not in the New Testament saying, hey, I just want you to jump off this ledge so that I can save the rest of the people. Or, Satan has no good motives. He obviously just wants to kill, steal, and destroy. And it's outlined in the New Testament over and over again. So while the example's not good, I get what they're saying. The prelude, the other films in the Avengers Infinity War series are very essential. You have to have that backstory to sort of know what's been happening leading up to Infinity War and what might be happening next. So in a sense, Infinity War might be the main event, the New Testament might be the main event, Jesus might be the main event, but there are a lot of things that happened in the Old Testament. There are a lot of things that led up to Jesus' birth. There are a lot of even similarities and things that happen in the Old Testament where you can actually draw and have a deeper understanding of the Bible if you read the Old Testament and then you see some of the New Testament promises that actually wash away things in the Old Testament. It's really quite eye-opening. So to me, I get what Andy Stanley is saying. Maybe the New Testament is not the best place for a Christian to start. Maybe it's one of those Star Wars type things where you shotgun, or how did they say, you machete order Star Wars. You start with episode 4 and then 5, and you go back to 1, 2, and 3, and then you watch episode 6. Maybe you kind of jump around, but I definitely don't think that we can just unhitch ourselves from the Old Testament. So I'm going to try to actually listen to more of what Charles Stanley has to say, but I would love to hear what others, what some of my friends have to say, with the family, what you guys have to say out there. Give me some feedback. Do you think that Andy Stanley was right in saying that we should unhitch ourselves from the Old Testament, or was this taken completely out of context? Give me your thoughts. There was another article that I kind of wanted to read, which compares Andy Stanley to a early Christian heretic named Marcion, and I'll just go into this for just a few minutes. Marcion, he lived between 85 and 160 A.D. He was a Christian heretic, and basically, as biblical scholar Francis Watson noted, he did the same thing. He said that, Christians, there's a Christian unease about the status and the function of the Old Testament. And basically, the Old Testament is not to be regarded as part of Christian scripture. And so basically, this is Andy Stanley borrowing some of that Marcionism, as this article from firstthings.com, which is part of the Institute on Religion and Public Life, has noted. So again, let me get your thoughts on that. I would love to hear from all of you. Is the Old Testament necessary in our faith? Because again, I don't really talk about my faith that much. I'll throw it in there every now and then, but this one is clearly about that, especially as it relates to the instructional handbook, guidebook that most Christians use. And I would love to hear from atheists as well. Let's actually have a real discussion about this, and not just it's all fake. Give me some real feedback. But anyway, that's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you for joining me, watching me, and tuning in. And I will see you all tomorrow. Peace out.